Like, I still try to explain the feeling of being at a show in Jersey, watching Saves the Day in Midtown, and I don't even remember who else was on that tour package, and being like, the feeling in that room is just something I will never experience again. I have never felt again.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was The Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Before we start, feel free to support the podcast if you've been listening for a while by signing up for my Patreon over at patreon.com/thiswasthescene. It's only $1 a month, and you kick ass if you do this. Evange Livanos cut her teeth as a booking agent and then becoming a manager over at Fata Booking in the early 2000s. Her name has come up plenty of times in the past few years, especially in the Matt Breen from Emanuel interview, which is episode 138, which we'll talk about in this episode. I remember her name coming up a lot back in the day when we'd be on tour, and this is the time where you're thinking about booking agents or managers, and her name would be popping up all over the place. So it was pretty cool to connect with her, which I did on Instagram. We were chatting a little bit. And I asked her, I was like, hey, do you want to be in the show? And she's like, yes. And so this is what we chat about. Growing up in the Scranton hardcore scene, starting to work for Eva at Fata Booking, were they starstruck by the bands they booked, managing Emanuel, the brawl with the Suicide Girls, what went wrong with the Orange Island tour, why she left Fata, managing Slipknot, Armor for Sleep, and a ton more. So I only had about an hour to talk with her because she has a busy schedule. So you kind of see that typically in other interviews, I open up the conversation a little bit more, but I was just trying to get in as much as possible in that time. So that's why this is a little bit shorter, and it seems like my questions are kind of coming out of nowhere, and I didn't expand on anything, like I said, but I think it came out really good. Make sure you check out her full-service music company. It's Alternate Side. It's alternatesi.de. So I have it's in the show notes if you want to just click on that link. This week's sponsor is Mint 400 Records. Mint 400 Records is an indie record label from New Jersey with bands across the United States, Canada, and Europe. The label features everything from indie rock and folk to post-punk and soul. Over 400 exciting releases, so Mint 400 has exceeded the 400, which is pretty cool. You can find Mint 400 Records releases streaming at Spotify, Pandora, Tidal, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Deezer, and more, or at all MP3 outlets worldwide. Visit mint400records.com for links and more info. Here's a clip from their band Respan Riper's song, Well Runs Dry, from the album The Swamps Are Burning. And super last, if you want to check out my animation company, it's drive80.com. I do explainer videos for businesses who have a hard time explaining what they do, and we create a 60-second elevator pitch for you to use visually in meetings and trade shows, on your website, on your social media, pretty much all over the place. So check it out, drive80, drive80.com, and you can email me at mike@drive80.com if you have any questions. That's it. So now we're going to jump into this shit. Feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who would love some punk rock nostalgia. With that said, let's get started. So your name has come up a bunch in interviews, and there's actually a question I'm going to ask you in a bit about a band who just talked about Fata Booking. You had sent me a message on Instagram because you heard the Matt Manuel interview.
Yeah.
And so I had some questions on that I'm going to get to. So I was kind of going through our messages and just kind of pulling out some bits and pieces. So like that's what we're going to get to. But before all that, just to kind of give people, give yourself a little promotion, even though you do at the end, like where, just tell everyone just really quickly, like, where you're at now and what you're doing.
I am in my office in Los Angeles, California, and I run a management company called Alternate Side with my business partner, Zachary Zarillo.
And you've been doing this ever since Fata, right? Just there was no other steps between there and now?
Oh, there was plenty of steps in between there and now. But I've been managing since I was like 25, 26, somewhere around that. And that's when I started managing Emanuel.
People say it all the time, and I always hear it differently. Is it fade? I know it's Fata. Is it Fata or Fata?
Feta.
Fata.
Yeah.
Okay. Just for small, whatever, incidental shit. So in the message you sent me, you said that you got into the scene. You were, because I had asked when you got in the scene or started managing. You said 2000, but you also said you grew up in Scranton hardcore scene.
Yes, I did.
Tell me a little bit about that, like how you got involved in that.
Well, I didn't know it was even a scene until I started working at my dad's diner, and he employed the hardcore scene of Scranton. And one of his cooks was in some local band, and he had a crush on me and asked me out and invited me to one of his shows, and I went with my dad.
That's
Oh,
amazing.
and my dad had known him since he was like six, too. So it wasn't like awkward or weird. Like my dad, he worked for my dad. And so I started dating this dude for years. And he kind of like showed me this world and this scene. And I went to a show for the first time at Cece's in Music. I don't even know what the fuck was playing. So that was like the first show I went to. And I was like looking around, wow, like this is the coolest shit ever. Like people are picking people up off the floor that are falling because they're moshing, and like girls aren't all glammed out. They had no makeup on and just looked like they were there for the music. It just was, I don't know. I just remember looking around and being like, what is this? Where am I? And how do I just dive in fully to this scene? And so I did. And like I started dating this dude. He played a bunch of shows. I would go to shows, and then I started discovering bands of my own, obviously. So then I would go to home base in Wilkes-Barre that had, shows. And then it turned out, after a while when I graduated college and I started working at Fata, it's so funny that like Hot Water Music was playing at home base. And I'm like, I used to go to shows there. That's so strange. So it was pretty full circle, but that's kind of how I got into it. And I just fucking dove in as hard as I could and went to so many shows. And like Scranton had its own kind of scene. So it wasn't like we were getting anything big, but like there was that band Shift that I loved with all my heart, and they would play a lot. Glassjaw played, One King Down would play, Strength for a Reason was like a local favorite. And then like the guys that worked at my dad's diner were in bands called Burial Ground and Option. And my ex-boyfriend's band was called Fallout, and then it changed to Solace. So like I was just in this world with all these dudes that worked at my dad's diner that became like really close friends of mine and at the time, and it showed me veganism, and I stopped eating meat when I was 15, and I'm going to be 45 at the end of this month, and I still don't eat meat. So it was very much a lifestyle that I adopted fully.
Was this something that when you went to that show, I think a lot of people have said that they were in their gut they were looking for something, and the moment they walked into the doors at some show, it was presented itself. Was that like something
Yes,
very similar to you?
100%. I came from, I was a dancer from age 4 till like age 23 or 22. So I was very much a pop girl. Like I listened to the radio. I would have tapes, on the countdown at night, my favorite song. I'd press record so I can record it. Like I was a pop girl, radio normie. It's all I knew was what was thrown to me by the public. So I had no idea that there was a whole scene of music that is not popular music, but is still popular. And just also being a female dancer, there's a lot of critique on your body and your image and your looks. And so I walked into this place all done up. I had makeup on. I don't know what the hell. I was probably wearing a dress. I looked around and it just was like, it felt like home, which was so strange. It was loud as fuck. It was dirty, disgusting, smelled like disgusting bar smell, on a
Yeah.
Sunday. It was an all ages show. So they only happened usually in the day. There was just something about it. I don't know what it is. I'll never be able to describe that feeling again. I've never had it again. But yeah, it was like, wow, I need to be here. And this is for me.
So how did that lead to I would usually ask way more questions to kind of bridge and open it up a bit, but since we're so limited to time, I'm gonna really start diving into your time at Fata and like the bands you worked with and any like crazy stories that happened. But how did you go from that to then you said you graduated from college and went to Fata? So
Yeah.
how did that happen?
Well, Eva, who owns Fata, is from Wilkes-Barre, PA, and I'm from Scranton, 30 minutes apart. And we have the same first name, Evangelia.
Yeah, that's why I got confused too, and I was mixing
Everyone
the two
did.
up. Yeah.
Everyone did. So the guys that I was friends with knew Eva because she used to put on shows, I think at the Praying Mantis in Wilkes-Barre. I think that's what it was called, or Green Mantis. I don't remember what the fuck it was called. And so she would put on shows and they'd be like, you have to meet this girl, Eva. She has your name. And I was like, get the fuck out of here. No one has my name because I'm named after like my dad's mother. It's a very old Greek woman name. It's not a common name even in Greece. I did, like they introduced me to her and we kind of talked on the phone and we became friends and we stayed in touch. And I had graduated college and I was offered a position at the elementary school. I went to school to be an elementary teacher, like K through 6. I was going to be a teacher. And I did like a teaching program. I taught 4th grade. And then like my dad was able to pull strings in the Scranton School District and get me a job. And in the meantime, me and Eva had been talking and I was just like, I don't know if I want to stay here. I really don't like the public school system, not in the sense I don't think that the teachers are equipped with what they need. And I don't want a life of struggle, which is hilarious because I picked management and here we are. But
Yeah.
so I was like, I don't know if I want to do this job. I don't know if I want to stay in Scranton. Like being involved with music and I was helping my guy friends, like when Burial Ground would play a show, I would sell their merch. And like, I was just so intoxicated by this world. So as Eva and I kept talking, I was like, yeah, I don't know if I want to stay here. And she's like, listen, I just moved to Philly. She lived with the drummer, I think it was, of Ink and Dagger as her friend. His name was Terry. And she's like, I have a spare bedroom. Why don't you come to Philly? She was in Philly for the weekend. She had just moved there from New Brunswick. And she's like, why don't you come and check it out for the weekend? And if you like it, you can stay here. And I was like, sure. Because it was the summertime. Like I just graduated college. I was working at a tanning salon. Like, what the fuck was I doing? And then I went for a weekend and I loved it. And I was like, let's do this. So I moved in with Eva. I was working at like the Gap on South Street. Like I wasn't working at Fata, but then like her office was in the basement of her row house in Philly, in South Philly. So I just started helping out. I think she went to Greece or something and she would go to Greece for like a month. She still does. She vacations for a long time. And I think I was like helping her and some of her other agents like get contracts for a tour. And like everything was cool. Like she came back and things were done. So I was just kind of like interning pretty much when I wasn't working. And then she was like, do you want a job? And then kind of gave me a couple bands. I think it was kind of like spitting and a small brown bike, maybe. Both of them ended up firing me, which was cool. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I would fire me too. Um, but so like here we were, an all female booking agency. Like there were 4 of us or 3 of us at the time. I just kind of dove in and like, that's kind of, I always just do that in life. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'll just figure it out. And I figured it out and I became an agent and I lived with Eva and I worked with Eva for like 4 years.
What would you say at that point would be your strength that you brought to the table when you started booking?
I am a perfectionist, and so I like doing everything right. And so being a perfectionist means that you work your ass off until you're good or until you feel you're good, which is never, because perfectionists are never satisfied. So, because of that, you can get me for real cheap and I will work overtime. So, I just did as much as I could all the time. And that was kind of my strength, was just like, I'm a grinder.
So what was like your day to day? I know it's obviously changed over the years because you own your agency now, right?
Yeah, I own my management company now.
So prior to that, because you're working for Eva and you're stepping in, you're learning all this stuff. Like, what did that look like? What did your surrounding look like? What did your tasks look like? Like, tell me a little bit about that.
We would wake up, we would make coffee, maybe have some breakfast, and go downstairs into the basement and sit at our desks. And the phones would ring. It was all landline. There were no cell phones then. So, and everything was AOL.com, everything. So we had landlines, fax machines, and barely email, just AOL. And our days would consist of either routing a tour or booking a tour. We would have to call promoters. We would email too, but call promoters, hope they answer, leave a message, and try to get the shows confirmed. Then the show would confirm, you would email them all of the information you needed. We would hand type in Word documents itineraries. I don't know if you've ever seen an itinerary from a booking agency that's like legit, like they spent money on it. We tried to copy what the agency group's itinerary looked like at the time, and we would hand type everything tab, 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 type, tab, 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 type, like the three columns, like the venue information, the promoter information, and like the deal information in one line. And we would, for an extra 5%, I think it was, we would get directions from MapQuest and cut and paste it into the itineraries and add that so the bands could have directions because there was no GPS, there was maps and atlases. And so we would type out directions if the bands wanted it. And like Hot Water Music never did, I don't think. I think they just wanted, they were always just maps and atlases guys. And so it was very much like on the phone trying to complete a tour took for fucking ever because it was just a lot of promoters were working over fax. So our offers would come via fax. Oh shit, we don't have ink in the fax machine. We have to get more ink. I can't read the offer. It was awful. So it was a lot of busy work. We were working harder, not smarter, but everyone was. Nobody was working smarter. Then there wasn't smart ways to work.
So at this point, there's four of you, you said, right?
I think it was three or four. Might have been just three at the time. Me, Eva, and Christine.
Were you just like sitting around in a square or whatever and just cranking music and just booking and shit like that? Or was it like just super serious and no one talked to each other?
No, I mean we'd have fun. Especially Christine wasn't there that long when I started. She was so much fucking fun. She would get so aggravated and just like yell and just be really funny. And we would talk about boys and stories and our we hung out a lot too that night. So we would like bring up the show last night or so and so. And did you hear what so and so said? I mean, we were 22, 23-year-old girls. Like we're gonna gossip and talk and then there were times it was super silent, if we were all super busy and we were grinding it out and a tour was starting, we still didn't have contracts back, like we'd bitch about certain promoters who were assholes or gave shitty offers or just wouldn't respond. Like yeah, it wasn't a silent office, it was a serious office but very light at the same time because we didn't, we were too young for it to be as serious as it is now for me.
So when you're sitting around, I'm just like trying to imagine because this is all the behind the scenes that we would, if you're a band or if you're a fan and you see a band, you don't get to know what the life's like in a van or practicing or writing songs. So it's like unlocking all of like what that looks like. So booking agents, my band, we never had a booking agent, but we always wanted one and it just never happened. But I was always fascinated by, just like that daily grind and shit looked like. So that's why I'm kind of opening this up. But this one thing, this came to me when you were talking before. Was there, because you guys were very well known and did, you booked a lot of huge bands. I mean, you gave me a list. It was, I mean, this was for Fate. It was like Jimmy Eat World, Hot Water Music, Flogging Molly, Elliot May. Like that's the right list for that booking agency, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got like
Yeah.
Rusted Root.
I mean, we didn't retain all of them, but Hot Water was there, I think, for 9 years or so. They were with Eva for a long time.
So were you there? Because you're there from the inception. Was there a moment? Because all of these bands, I'm like, I used to geek out of these bands, and still like to hear these names. I'm like, holy fuck. Was there in the beginning when all this happened where you had your first really big band where someone said, yeah, we just booked this, and you guys like freaked the fuck out?
Well, I
Or did
never
you
had
not
the.
care that much when that happened?
I don't think because nothing was that big. Like Jimmy Eat World, when I came, Eva had already lost Jimmy Eat World. I think she was finishing up a tour or something. It was during Clarity. And then they hired a manager and then they fired Fata. It happened all the time. We were young, but they weren't huge yet. It was well before Bleed American. It was well, like, same for Flogging Molly. I think she worked like a cycle for them or maybe like a year. They got big, they fired us. So, but at the time, like nothing was that big. I think when she got Pretty Girls Make Graves, that was a moment where I think they were playing like some hipster festival in New York on the pier. I can't remember what it was. And that felt like, wow, this is really cool. But nothing felt like, oh, this is huge. Nothing.
I mean, it was still like they weren't Jimmy Eat World wasn't Jimmy Eat World status they are now, but when Clarity came out, I mean, Static Prevails when we saw them play. I saw them play with the Get Up Kids in New Jersey, the Wayne Skaters World, and it was them and Get Up Kids, and Get Up Kids had just put out 4 Minute Mile, and they're touring on that. And even at that point, they're still not really known, but we would see them as to be like these gigantic bands. So
Yeah.
so did they look like that at all to you, or were you just kind of like, oh, okay, how about music? Sure.
I think no, because they would stay at our house and we would know like they don't leave, they don't like they're pigs, they leave shit everywhere. Like it wasn't, they weren't, we weren't, there was no like, they were kind of part of our family that we were the same age. So it's hard to look at it and be like, oh my God, they're huge when it's the same age. And like even artists we didn't book would stay at our house. Like Hot Rod Circuit would stay at our house. I think some of the guys, I think at least Hunter from AFI would stay over. He's still a friend of mine to this day. So to us, it was like, oh, our friends are playing the Trocadero, let's go.
Mm.
Not like it just, yeah, it was weird. And it could have just been I was dumb as fuck and didn't know what was happening. Because you also didn't know what was happening. You didn't know that this was a movement, that this was a, like, I still try to explain the feeling of being at a show in Jersey, watching Saves the Day in Midtown. And I don't even remember who else was on that tour package, and being like, the feeling in that room is just something I will never experience again. I have never felt again because we were part of something. Or being in the church when Elliot's playing and Arcade Fire's supporting them. Like what?
Wow.
It was just like those are the moments that like I can't explain. It was cool, it, but you didn't know you were in the middle of anything. You were just going to a show, but there was something interesting happening.
Yeah, because I mean, I guess everyone had a different viewpoint. From a band's viewpoint, they want to get signed by a booking agent. You guys are a name that's getting thrown around, like you guys, Andrew Ellis, whoever the fuck. But it's funny because we would see that and then we'd see these shows, these bands you're booking. We're like, fuck, man, they must see that. But I guess when you're in it, you're like, yeah, I don't know, that's just kind of normal to me.
Yeah, you don't see it at all because you're too busy working to enjoy it, truly.
You had listened to the Emanuel interview because you had booked. That was the first band you managed, right?
Yep.
So tell me a little bit about managing them. I know you
um,
could probably talk for like hours, but like I just want to just kind of get your temperature and just see what comes out of your mouth.
they were wild. They were so clever though. They were so funny. They were so young and so good. Like it's ridiculous. I remember I kept getting emails signed like love poems signed by Emmanuel Nice. And I'm like, who the fuck is Emmanuel Nice? And then I would like ask Eva, and I think Eva started getting them too, or she was getting them also. And then I think I got like love letters, like shit in the mail. I don't know. They just were so annoying, and I didn't understand it. And then one night, I don't remember who said someone aimed it to me, AOL Instant Messenger, and they were like, "Check out this band." And I was like, "This band is sick." And they're like, and it turns so like I hit them up, I think, and then it turns out they were trying to send me these love poems during the time they sent us their like CD, and thought that we'd get the CD and like get their poems and we'd make the connection and be like, ha ha ha, yeah, come on. But instead, we have a huge ass pile of CDs would get sent because like record labels would send us CDs, bands, unsigned bands would send us CDs to try to consider for booking, and we'd go through them once a month. But until then, they would just sit in a pile in the corner, just big ass pile of mail. So I don't know where the hell the Emmanuel CD was. So it didn't make the connection. And then someone sent me their link. Might have been Gabe from Midtown. And who the fuck was it? I don't. And I just remember being like, and I was working late that night because I was trying to get contracts back. So I was sending out emails to let promoters know we need the contracts back. Someone sent me the link, and I was like, this is so good. And I hit them up, and I started to book them. And as an agent, as we did at the time, none of these bands. I mean, now bands have managers before they even have a fucking song. But back then, no way. You didn't have a manager unless you were like massive. So they didn't have a label, they had nothing. And so as booking agents, we would get bands signed all the time because it would make our lives easier if there was marketing and a team behind the band versus us doing it, trying to get them on a tour, being like, they have nothing. They've got nothing going on. Here, take them on board. So we always try to get the band signed. So with Emanuel, I helped them do a deal with on spec with that producer Machine because their manager, Machine's manager was Bob McClin from Crush at the time, not anymore. And Bob was like, why don't we do a deal on spec? And I had never heard that term before. I was like, what the fuck does that mean? Basically, it's like you do a deal kind of for free with a contract in place that says if the band gets signed for X amount of dollars, the producer will retain this much money of that advance. So basically, it's just like he'll do the deal, help you shop it. And they were so confident that the music would be so good that you go and get a deal and then the producer gets paid after the fact. So that's what we did. I feel like they drove to Brooklyn to record and the van broke down. Like the van like broke down numerous times. I think they were on the side of the road and I think the van had no floor on the passenger side. The shittiest van at the time. Yeah, and they made the record and it was the best thing I ever heard in my life and everybody was in a frenzy about this band and I was 25 and they had no manager, so I was their representation. I was their booking agent. And I started doing like managerial things, like taking meetings with labels and talking to the band on behalf of labels. Like, hey, this person reached out and this person reached out. And, you know, Vagrant Records reached out and flew us all to Los Angeles and put the band up at the Hyatt on Sunset, which I don't even think exists anymore. I think it was my first time in LA as well. And we met with them and they had like a Baja Fresh lunch at the office. And they just kind of like all of the Vagrant staff at the time were like ragging on each other like they were best friends. And that was like Emmanuel's sense of humor is they just loved to make fun of everybody. So they seemed to get along well, but they had offers from TVT made an offer. Fueled by Ramen made an offer before FBR was like the powerhouse it is now, but they were well on their way. It was before they teamed up with Atlantic, so it was John Janik calling me personally to make the offer. Bigger, they did a shitty showcase for Sony for Matt Pinfield. Yeah, we did a whole like New York meetings. It was so stupid.
Is any of that shit like ever? Does anyone ever enjoy that shit? Like on both sides? It sounds like it's a disaster every time, or it just fucking blows.
I think well, I mean, now it's different. If I have an artist and I know that like this label's interested and it makes sense and it's a good partner, that's cool. Shopping I hate it. We don't really shop our artists too much at this point though. Like now it's like, I know where an artist belongs typically when I hear it and we vibe it out. And, you know, every now and then there's like an artist or two that gets a label frenzy around it, but we typically know like where they belong. I still wonder to this day, though, what would have happened to Emmanuel's career if they signed a Fueled by Ramen instead of Vagrant.
Well, yeah, actually, I asked you about that because it's been in Matt's interview, and it's been kind of thought of that Vagrant dropped the ball and fucked them because the album got out prior to like digitally leaked.
I think they wanted to wait. I can't remember. It was so long ago. They wanted to wait to put it out for a tour, I think, because back then touring was everything. It's not like now where you could put out music and never tour and make money. The only way to make money was to sell the physical components, like on iTunes. There was no Spotify, there was no streaming, there was nothing. You would buy it, download it, listen. I don't know if the leak hurt them. I think the band just really, you know, all artists I work with want records to come out immediately, and then they can't stand it when they have to wait. It's like the worst day of my life when I'm like, I have to call this fucking band and tell them that the label wants to push the release back. That happens all the time. I don't think that fucked the band per se. I don't think it helped them, but because in the day and age that was very focused on first week numbers, which are to me useless at this point. So people were kind of looking at their numbers, but they never had a lack of opportunity ever when it came to touring. So when I look at the big picture, I don't know if that hurt them. I think what hurt them was making a record they shouldn't have made too soon. Like Black Earth Tiger was so good, but that should have been record 4.
Interesting.
Or record 3. Like they needed a soundtrack to a Headrush, something else that was maybe bridge the gap before that abrupt change. and then they could have done the more artsy, different record. I think they evolved too quick, and they were very headstrong, very very headstrong on when it came to creative. And to also to their defense as well, though, there wasn't a true A&R. Like there wasn't an adult telling these young kids like, "Hey, don't make that fucking record." Like we didn't even have real demos. So there wasn't anything to hear and be like, you know what, don't make that song yet. Let's make the song, but let's wait to put that out. Let's do this first. Let's do an EP first. Let's There needed to be another record after that record in order to keep their momentum going.
It doesn't sound like they would have listened either way, though.
100% true, especially Matt's headspace at the time. Matt was such a smart kid. I mean, he was so smart. He was so fucking creative. He was such a visionary. Sometimes would get a little too big ideas, but I didn't know he was fucked up as bad as he was fucked up. I knew they were Southern boys that loved to drink. They're sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That's a band, but I didn't know there was other shit wrong until there was a 30 Seconds to Mars tour. And the drummer was up for days. I remember the band called me and they're like, something's wrong with Anthony. He hasn't slept. He's been up for days. We don't know what's going on, because he was just like pounding beers and taking drugs and was kind of fucking like out of his mind. So we had to send him home and get a fill-in drummer so they didn't miss any shows. And they might have missed one show or something, but like it was a lot of that shit. That doesn't help a band stay on task if you're all fucked up all the time. Like there wasn't anyone in the band that was like truly like serious, because they were so young and so much happened so quick for them. But I mean, what a fucking incredible band. And they truly changed my life. They made me see what I wanted to be. And it wasn't a booking agent. I hated being a booking agent. The job sucks.
What was it? What was like the thing within that made you wanted to just leave that? And I mean, obviously, hating booking, being a booking agent is one thing. That's a definite answer. But what was it with them and managing that you're like, this is what I love about it?
You could be creative and you're part of it versus the agent. And like, I have agents that are super involved, but there does come a point where their hands are up and they don't deal with a lot of the stuff. I loved being buried in it with the artist, and it's like us together as a family against the world. And I liked being part of the creative process. I liked being able to have cool ideas to execute versus like, here's your show, here's your money, here's some festival offers, bye-bye. So for me, I liked being all knowing. Like I remember, as an agent, someone would ask me a question about their record deal of something, of a band I worked with. I wouldn't know the answer, and that drove me nuts. I like to have the answers. So for me, I just wanted to be full stop when it came to being involved with an artist career.
It was kind of funny before you had said how you had graduated college and you were teaching what, sixth grade was it? Or K
Fourth,
through
fourth grade,
fourth grade.
10 and 11-year-olds.
It's like you literally set yourself up for this career because of
Oh,
that.
oh, no shit.
Like as soon as you said that, I'm like, oh my God, that right there. I mean, you literally went to school for, you did go to school for this because you were dealing with the children. I mean, great, not everyone's like that. I can easily, safely, in a joking way, say this from my perspective, but I just know bands and a lot of them have that mentality where they're just a giant pain in the dick.
Yep, yep. I mean, they were a tough band because like the worst feeling is never knowing when the other shoe's going to drop and never knowing when I'm going to get a call. Like it became a thing after a while where like I'd get a call that like they fucked up a green room or they did something. Like God help them if Twitter was a thing, they would have been canceled immediately. Just in the way that they were just so unruly. They didn't give a fuck. They did not give a fuck about rules, nothing. They definitely, it was a different time, but I would always be nervous about their health and stability because I would have these deep conversations with Matt Breen. Sometimes he would just call me and be like, man, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Like, I don't know. And I'd be like, what else are you going to do, man? Like, you're born for this. Like this. And I have still, unfortunately, I still have these calls today in this day and age because at the end of the day, being an artist doesn't mean that you're like, it comes with, I don't want to say it comes with mental health. It doesn't come with mental health issues. I have plenty of mentally healthy artists, but at the same time, it just comes with a different use of the brain than other people. I'm engaged to be married to a band dude. His brain works differently than mine, and he's an ex-band dude, by the way.
Okay.
I'm not. Yeah, it just happened. I was not stoked when I found out he was in a band with me. Anyway, it's just a different kind of person. And I would tell Matt, like, Matt, stay on it. Like, do this. You're born for it. Like, make the songs you want. He felt, I think Matt felt very trapped. I think that happens with bands when they sign real early and then they grow up because they were kids. And then they toured for so long on the record. And that was another thing. They should have put something out. There should have been an EP. There should have been a song. There should have been something more. But when a band is having so much momentum, you can't take them off the road. You have to keep going because you're pushing sales because it's the only way to sell your record.
So before I jump off of Emmanuel, 'cause you said something. Matt said something in his interview about there was this fight and they like it was basically with like the Suicide Girl or like Suicide Girl started like beating them or something like that. And then you said this was the first band where you got punched in the face for the first and only time of my life because of this band.
Yep, got punched in the face trying to defend those motherfuckers. We were at Eva's, she had a birthday party. Like we were just so close with Emmanuel. Like I said, they were part of my family. Stayed at my home, came over for holidays. I loved them so much. And to this day, I still have such an affinity for them. And I talked to Brian sometimes. It's about it. I haven't talked to any of the rest of them. And I just still love them to this day. So they would love to be a part of our life. So I think we rented out some hall in like North Philly, and we had like a fake prom for Eva's birthday, and they came in for it. They like came in and they wore little tuxedos and brought their girlfriends. Everybody was all dressed up. And I guess Suicide Girls were in town and they heard that Emanuel was there. And this was after they got kicked off the tour. And then I think Emanuel did some sort of radio interview in Kansas or something and said like openly like fuck Suicide Girls. I don't know what they did. They did something that pissed them off that somebody heard. So Suicide Girls are in Philly and they find out where we are somehow. They come into this private party. Like we rented out this space. I think it was called Silk City. And they come in and there's like a scuffle. And I go outside and there's a brawl happening. And Brian gets punched in the face by one of the girls, Suicide Girls. His nose starts bleeding. He jumps in. I see a brawl. All I see are my boys getting fucked up. I have a little pink dress on. I go to reach to get Matt Barber out of the fight, and I don't know where it came from or what happened, but someone punched me right in the fucking face, right in the cheekbone on my left-hand side. And my reaction was just to take my heel off and just fucking pummel whoever the hell did it. I don't remember seeing anything. It was just a frenzy. And then my friend Nick, who was the bouncer, picked me up and threw me against the wall and said, "You stay here, don't you get hurt." And just went in like you see in movies, just like Hulk, just starts ripping Emanuel out of there, just pulling them one by one, putting them over to me. And he was like, "Get them out of here."
Oh my God.
I take him home, and I'm like, at that point, I'm like crying because I've never been punched in the face before. And I'm like, "Ooh," and they're all bloody and fucked up. Anthony fell asleep, was wasted, fell asleep inside, has no idea what happened, comes out. He's so drunk, he's walking zigzag. And one of the guys comes and runs and tries to like kick him, like ninja kick him or whatever. And he's so drunk, he's walking back and forth, like wobbling. So he misses it completely, has no idea what's happening. Totally falls asleep inside. So everyone else got roughed up when we went back to my house. And yeah, I got punched in the face for this fucking band. Just because I wanted to make sure they were okay. I didn't want anybody getting hurt. So I go to get them out of there and I get hit. Tummies.
Hey, okay, so I'm gonna ask you about there was a story I usually have better segues, but I just did an interview with Dave Gorman from Orange Island. Do you remember this band?
Yeah, holy shit, yeah.
Okay, so he said this in his interview, and I told him I was like, dude, I'm gonna ask this question. He's like, oh shit. So he had this 3-hour interview, and he's like, so all these things just kept going wrong for this band, and he said one of the things that went wrong that he goes, we finally got ourselves a booking agency, and he's like, we paid a lot of money and the tour just did not go as planned, and it was you guys, and I think you were the one booking it. Do you remember what went wrong with that tour?
Wait, was Emmanuel on the tour or is this something completely different?
This is a complete jump from talking about Emmanuel. This is they just for limited time. This was like 2001, I think, 2001, 2002, and they were with the Records, and
Hmm.
Casey had connected them with you guys, I think, and they were like so stoked, and they were like, yeah, we dropped a lot of money, and the tour just did not work out as planned. Do you remember this at all?
I think it's like these, Eva would take these tours that would pay us to book like a record label tour. And it would be like, here, take our bands, I'll book a tour. We need to get them on the road. They have releases, blah, blah, blah. Here's some money. And then I would kind of do it because I needed the money. I didn't, I was making $400 a month. I
Oh
needed money.
wow, really?
Well, I worked for free for the first, I think, 2.5 or 3 years. And I worked at a bar on South Street in the Gap.
Holy shit.
So yeah, I didn't get paid barely anything. So when I did finally make some money, I would make like half of my commissions. Like we got paid 10%. So I would make 5% of anything I booked when it was active. But if everybody was home, I made no money. So it was really, 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 really tough. So Eva would take on a lot of these projects and we would book them. And I assume nobody gave a shit about the band because they were so small. So you can only do a tour if people come. But if the band doesn't have any fans, a lot of these labels would pay us to do these tours and not realize that, like, well, nobody knows who these artists are and there's no real headliner. So how are you expecting these shows to go well when there's, if the band's from one city and you want them to go full US, nobody in LA knows who they are, chain reaction, like that part was hard. But I'm sure there's always tours, and there was always tours that just shit the bed because just every like law of averages, just everything would go wrong or something of that sort. But I don't think it was for lack of booking. It probably was a lot of things where like the promoters were like, I don't want this show. And we were like forcing them to take it. That happened a lot. That sucked.
See, that's interesting for that perspective because I've talked to so many bands and they'll like have something to say about the label and the labels are like, yeah, well, this is our side of it. So it's interesting to me to like open this up for people to see that like this is what happens over here and this is what happens over here.
I mean, I'm sure it really sucks for the band more than it sucks for anyone else because at the end of the day, I can have a promoter tell me to fuck off if they don't want to book this band and I can't get a tour done, but I still get to go to sleep in my bed. I might be broke as fuck, probably as poor as the bands at the time, but they didn't know. But at least I'm not in a van in the middle of a city that I was told to go to, and maybe that promoter stiffed me because don't forget, there were no cell phones. So if a promoter decided to stiff the band or not show up, or you wouldn't know a show wasn't promoted until a band showed up, and they'd call you from a payphone, you would have no idea. They had our home line to call us. So when that went off at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. or whatever the case might be, it was because there was something like that. Like we would have certain bands walk promoters to the ATM to get money. So it wasn't a way where like we would know that we couldn't predict anything going wrong until it happened.
How far into being at Fata? How long were you there for? Or how many years were you there?
Like 4 years, I think.
So right about the time where you said, basically from what you said before, that's when you actually started to make a little bit of money. At that point, how did you start to handle, well, because you were managing at this point then, you stopped booking tours.
I was doing both because managing made me no money because it's not like Emmanuel would come home with a profit. They were still developing. You don't make money as a manager off the bat. It takes years for a band to make you some real money because if they're supporting, they're getting paid like $250 a show and that goes to costs. There's no money. It sucks. So I still had a book to pay my bills.
So then how, like through the years when you had things like that where things were going wrong, did you find a way to, I mean, was there a way to just not have those shows fall through, or did you just have to decide to go with bigger bands and not deal with small bands to avoid that?
Well, I eventually left Fata and went to a different agency, which had some bigger metal bands, which was helpful because we just didn't do those tours. Like we just wouldn't do like a label tour. Just wasn't a thing. But I wasn't the boss. I was not a partner. I was Eva's employee. So if she's like, here's a tour I need you to book, I'd book the tour. So that was my job. And if it shit the bed and fell apart, it wasn't for lack of trying. It was either nobody cared about the band, the promoters on that tour just happened to all suck, but we're the only ones that would accept the tour. It's really hard to say.
Do you remember anything from those 3 years at Fata, like strictly around that time, where like just something awesome happened, or like there was a crazy show that was great, or like I don't know, like you have these stories that you might not think that really make that might not be like, this I don't really this is a great story, but it might be a great story to hear.
I'm trying to think. There was just so many great stories. I mean, our bands would play a show, and then we would take them to Tattooed Moms to drink, and then we would party back at our house till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and we'd have dance party in the kitchen, and we would blast pop music and drink Greek moonshine and have like the time of our life with these bands. And from Blood Brothers to Small Brown Bike to Emanuel to Hot Water. They didn't rage too much. Hot Water liked being at the bar. They weren't really like dance party in the house vibes. And so, we would just stay up and just have a blast. And then everybody would crash. We'd wake up the next day and make them breakfast. They'd eat and then off they'd go. But we always had some like really good hang times with them and really good moments and just in our homes with them, which was cool. So, I don't really think it was so many moments of like being at shows that mattered to me. It was more of like the behind the scenes, like hanging out with them outside of everybody else, which was really cool.
Do you think if like you went back to that time where you started booking, you took the path on the whole booking and managing. If you went back there and didn't go that path, do you think you would have stuck with the scene as long as you did?
Probably not. No.
Really?
I'd probably be a normie and listen to the radio right now with 3 kids and on my second marriage. Who knows? But I certainly don't think I would have stayed in it.
Was there any bands that, like you said, the Blood Brothers, and it's like certain bands get on stage and they just have this like persona, and then they like maybe look a little bit crazier. They're letting it loose. Were any bands that you saw like that where they matched like that persona off stage that they were on stage?
Yeah, Emanuel.
Oh yeah.
100%.
That's totally fucking true. So why did you leave? Like why did you leave and how did you leave Fata?
I left Fata because it was just becoming really difficult, like working and living with someone, and I felt like I wanted to learn more, and I didn't think I was learning at Fata. I wanted to work on different types of artists and bigger bands, and I wanted there to be a bigger pool for Emmanuel to swim in. And so, Eva is a punk-hearted girl through and through. And I remember we had an offer I think it was from the agency group, to buy us. And she didn't want to sell. And I was like, sell, please, this grind is killing me. But she didn't, bless her heart, and she still didn't. She's still independent to this day. But for me, I just kind of wanted something a little bit more. So I left. And I gave them all of my artist notice and said, hey, like I'm leaving. You can stay here. Eva will look after you. And I think at the time I had like Silverstein, Armor for Sleep. I had Copeland, but Eva moved them to somebody else. I found Copeland and brought them in, but then she wanted me to focus on Silverstein. So she moved them to somebody else that was working there. I don't know. I had like 8 bands. Emery, I think I had 2 on Tooth and Nail. I did a lot of tooth and nail stuff at the time. And so I gave them the option to stay. I went on my own for a few months to let the dust settle and see like kind of what offers would be out there for me. And then I ended up going to work for Tim Bohr, and he had a company called Face the Music Touring. And that had like a bunch of rock star agents now, but at the time it was like Nick Storch was under him, Justin Bridgewater, Josh Klein, me, Tim Bohr, and Leah Peterson, who are now Sound Talent Group, except Josh Klein's at UTA. Nick Storch is at, I think, ICM, or he was at ICM. But I went there because I wanted to learn more. And at the time, Tim Bohr worked for like, Children of Bodom. Nick had Coheed and Cambria at the time. Killswitch Engage. They had Lamb of God. I mean, it was big bands, and I liked being a part of that. We had From Autumn to Ashes, and I was brought on the From Autumn to Ashes team, and the manager of From Autumn to Ashes at the time was also the manager of Slipknot. And so I met Corey Brennan that way, and I became kind of familiar with Corey. I remember Tim brought me to New York City to meet with Corey in the old Sanctuary offices in New York. Years later, I find myself in New York City, and I need a job. And Corey Brennan hires me, and I end up working for Slipknot for years. So, like, it was all kind of full circle from booking, but it was because I met him years ago when I was an agent. We got on well. So, yeah, it was very interesting.
So this has nothing to do with the scene, but I am fascinated with Slipknot. Like
They're a fascinating band.
dude, I watch so many YouTube things on that band because they're just so fascinating. And any interview I see with Corey, he seems like he's like the coolest fucking guy.
He's so smart. He's politically aware. He has a whip of a tongue. Like, God, if you're on his bad side, get out of the way. But he's pretty brilliant. The whole band is. It was the most interesting experience for me. It really kind of cut my teeth for sure on like what real management was, and like the dumb, stupid shit I was dealing with bands that I thought had like things going on. It was just like, no, no, you don't know opportunity until you're working with a big band, and you're paid pretty much to like tell people, like, everyone wants to talk to Slipknot's manager. It's real hard to develop an artist that nobody cares about. So it was interesting to see the difference of, holy shit, like, this is a card. People answer my emails. I'm not grinding. This is interesting. And it kind of took me about 6 months to get used to that, I think, when I ended up there. But they're a fascinating band.
I was gonna say, I was like, when that started to happen, did you get like some massive imposter syndrome, or did you just own it?
Yeah, I still have it, I think. Because it's just like, sometimes you look around and I'm just like, how the fuck did I get here? Like, do I belong here? It's a very hard business. It's a very, everything that an artist does is reflective of you as the manager at times. And so if an artist is like, I'm canceling this tour and fuck this, and I don't want to do this anymore, and you have to then call the agent and all the other artists on the band, like on the bill, and cancel the tour last minute because an artist doesn't feel like touring or whatever the case might be, that hurts your reputation. And then you feel like a failure as a manager because you can't control your artist. Then you have to realize you're not a dictator, and artists are going to do what they're going to do because they're humans. And it's like all this like mental shit that happens to you because all you want is for everything to go well for your artists and for them to have every opportunity that you think they deserve because the vision you have for them is so strong. But if they don't have it, then it's hard. It's a lot harder. So yeah, I mean, I think I had imposter syndrome for a while, and then I realized like, no, I'm fucking in this, and I'm good at my job, and I'm gonna kill it. And we all worked on areas of Slipknot. It's not a band where there's one day to day. We all had to share different, responsibilities of them. And then I did a lot of the developing acts when I was at that company because I love to develop artists. It stems from the booking. I don't know why it's so hard to develop an artist from zero, like nothing. Find them a label, find them a team. It's so hard, but I just love it because when they finally get some wins, it's like better than drugs, I would imagine. I don't do drugs. I don't know what that high is like, but I have a feeling if it's anything close to that, I know why people do them.
Isn't it kind of weird though, because a band, the business side it's the same kind of foundation where you can just move pieces around, but the fundamentals are there, and you got to get a little creative. But for a band, I mean, if they have to create music that people want, I mean, that's the key. And if they already did that initially, and then the second round they start creating music that's really, then that battle starts because they're like, well, this is how I see it, and you're going, I know, but this shit's not gonna work. And like, how do you try to guide someone when that's the case?
It's hard. There's only so much you can do. You hope that the vibe and the relationship you have with them is strong enough to where they can listen to reason, and you hope that they're just normal personality, that they have is not so absolute that they don't listen to anybody. And there are artists like that and artists that aren't. And, it's not a good conversation to be like, I don't think that song's there. But luckily they're on our end right now. We have A&R people that can help with that. But sometimes they're like, I don't care. I'm putting the song out. I want to put it out. And you're like, okay, dude, or dudette. And you do it. You try to make it the best situation you can for them. But sometimes you can't. You can't make kids like shit.
No, I mean, especially now it's different, but back then, and I'll wrap this up soon. Back then, when you saw that, I mean, it was less, there was less people involved in the band's existence when you were
It was true. Yeah.
So, was there a point back then where when you were booking your manager, or like when you were doing both, and you like one of their bands you were talking to, and they were showing you stuff? I mean, great, you talked about Emanuel, but anyone else where you're like, I don't think this is gonna work, and it actually, they were right.
I think artists are right a lot. And I think as a manager, it's the one thing I learned is like kind of trust them more than like, don't be the almighty, like I'm the manager, I know everything. We don't. Like they're at these shows, they know what songs are reacting and what aren't. But I think also I didn't have the balls back then to tell an artist no, or like that's not a good idea, or I wouldn't do that. Like I didn't have the balls to check an artist's ego like now, because now like that's what you pay me for. If you just want somebody to say yes to you all the time, then don't hire a manager because we're here to manage the business. The song stuff, like I don't get too caught up in it because I usually feel like it's an evolution. But when it's an entire record, that's when you have to speak up. But we always hear demos and stuff in advance and team up artists with the right producers to kind of pull out of them what they need. And there's a lot more conversation now with A&R than there was back then. Also, indies are very different than majors, and most of our artists at this point of our life are on majors. We have a few that are on indies, a few that are unsigned, but for the most part, most of our artists are on major labels that have A&R people that are wildly involved to the annoying degree of A&R because, songwriting sessions, producers, co-writing sessions, like it's a whole thing. It wasn't like that back then.
Oh my God, I'd fucking lose my mind if that was that shit. Jesus Christ. I literally hate anyone telling me what to do creatively. So that's probably why I'm at where I'm at, just like making no money with creative shit.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not even a matter of being told what to do. It's more of like an advice or a guidance. And it's like if you vibe with a certain producer who's a good writer, it's a collab. You're writing together. They're not saying, hey, puppet, sing this. That exists in like maybe super, super, super pop land, like with a manufactured artist. But for the most part, they're in a studio and they're working together to create that song. Now, some artists don't want to do that, and that's cool. They're like, no, I'm cool being this size. Cool. But if an artist is like, I want to be on the radio, well, then buckle up because we'll get you on the radio, but you have to do what we say.
Interesting. So before I ask the last two questions, wrap this up. Armor for Sleep, just because this podcast started off strictly based in Jersey, and I definitely dip back into more obscure Jersey stuff. So Armor for Sleep, coming from Jersey, how was it like working with them?
I didn't deal too direct with them. It was strange. They had this manager at the time. She was a crush. And so I dealt mainly with her. And I would see the guys at shows, but I was not very tight with them. And it was a bummer because they were super tight with Emanuel. That might have been how I ended up getting Armor. I think they might have either been dropped or they left William Morris. And then they came over, or maybe they went to William Morris after me. I don't fucking know. They fired me. Their manager fired me. She was a nightmare. She had no idea what she was doing. And so she would like have these dumb ideas and then I would have to try to execute them because at the time it was like manager's the boss of the agent. And now it's not like that. It's like obviously the manager can make the final call, but you're an asshole if you act that way. Like it's a collaborative team, manager and agent. So it was hard because I felt very much like I had no power over the band and I just had to do what she wanted. But I loved the band, and when they made that, what the fuck was that record that everyone likes? It was so good. I was so stoked to work on it.
Yeah, with Car Underwater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh my, actually, I'm gonna Google this, and I'm just gonna edit like I said it really fast. Fuck, what is that record? What do you do? What do you do? Yeah, what to do when you're dead? When you're dead.
Yes.
Yes, that was Yeah, that record fucking that was such a good record.
That record slapped. And
Yeah.
they were on Equal Vision.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was difficult. I didn't really deal much with the label. Like I said, I dealt a lot with the manager, and she was not very nice and kind of a mare. I don't think she's in music now, but boy, thank God.
It's so wild to hear all this because it's just again my viewpoint back then from being in a band and all these things I wanted. I was like, man, everyone else's life is so much better than ours. So like we're struggling, everyone has it easy, but it's so crazy to feel like, yeah, no, it's not like that.
Everyone was struggling. I'm still struggling, and owning a company is fucking hard.
Yeah, man, this must have been a bitch for the last since I mean prior to 2020, just with the music industry in general. I feel it's like hard, but the last almost 2 years, it must have been awful, or must still be awful.
It was hard, but we have a lot of artists that don't necessarily tour and make money. Like we have artists that stream and make a lot of money off streaming.
Oh wow,
So their lives are great because COVID or not COVID, they don't need to tour to make their money.
wow.
We had a lot of like, you know, features and things like that. And, we're at the point now where we're doing okay. It doesn't like granted we have a very tour I personally my roster is very tour heavy. My partner Zach is more streaming heavy and I'd like to shift that a little bit and get a little bit more streaming heavy of a roster. But I do have a bunch of artists that own their back catalog and make money off it while they sleep, which is the key.
Damn. Yeah.
So we didn't like die during COVID. We were fine.
Well, that's good. Well, cool. Well, I will let you get back to all of that fun stuff. So, two questions. So, one, I was asked before I asked the last question. What would you like to plug? It could be about what you're doing. It could be about what friends doing. It could be about both.
Oh shit. I think I have a band that I've been with for about 8 years, and their name is Citizen. And they put out a record um, months ago that I think is the best record they've done in their whole career. Self produced, wrote it all, and you guys should go check it out.
I love that band.
They're so fucking good. They're coming over for Thanksgiving. I can't wait. I've known them since my singer was 16 going on 17, or he was 17 when I picked them up. My singer and my lead guitarist, Nick, were 17. They just graduated high school, did a tour in a Dodge Durango that died um, halfway along the tour. And because they weren't adults yet, they couldn't rent a vehicle. And the dad had to fly out. It was a whole thing. But I've been with them for so long. And, that was one of the first bands I picked up when I left 5B, when I was stopped working with Slipknot. Citizen was probably the second band I picked up. And to this day, we're still together. And, I love them very, very much. Very similar vibe to like the feeling I had when I picked up Emanuel. Like I don't have that with every single artist, but with Citizen, like you can't not do that after 8 years and multiple different evolutions of sound and successes. And they're just so good. The album Life in Your Glass World is just absolutely incredible.
So I was just gonna say, and I'll let you go. So I feel like they almost had like an Emmanuel kind of path because Youth that was harder and like Roam the Room and I'm cheating right now because I'm looking at the Spotify, but Figure You Out. Like I love those songs. They've been in my Spotify list for so long. And then Life in Your Glass World, like that seems to be a bit more like not spacey, but it's opened up a little bit more. Like Blue Sunday, that's definitely a different vibe than the songs on Youth.
Well, they've evolved a lot. I mean, they went from Youth was a record that got them huge, and they kind of got pigeonholed into a pop punk band, and they don't identify with that. So I think that they retaliated in a sense by making Everybody's Going to Heaven, which at the time wasn't well received. Now you ask people and you're like, what's your favorite Citizen album? And they're like, Everybody's Going to Heaven. And it's always a joke with Citizen. They're like, where the hell were these people back then? Because it was tough. And then they made As You Please, and that they wrote themselves. I think they produced that one themselves too. I'm not sure. And that has some bangers on it. But Life in Your Glass World is like dancey. Like it evolved. They're older. they've been on run for cover forever. There's no pressure now. They've realized like, all right, we're not trying to be on the radio. We're not trying to be the biggest band in the world. We just want to make music that we fucking love. And when you can accept that, I think it puts a bit of freedom in your creative process, and it's not as much pressure.
Totally. Yeah, and everyone check out Blue Sunday is that's like their single off of Life in Your Glass World. They had like the video for that, right?
Yeah, they had. That's one of them. The first single was like called "I Want to Kill You."
Okay. Yeah. So definitely, I love that band. So definitely, I agree with you. So,
I will plug that band all the time.
all right. So last question. What scene ethics do you hold on to this day?
Loyalty. I'm very, 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 very loyal to a fault. Um, I think the scene was, like Emanuel was very loyal to me. Of course, they could have fired me. Of course, there was another manager out there who knew more, but they trusted me because they knew that like my intentions were honest. It was never about money. I don't even know how, I don't think I ever, I had to work other jobs managing them. Like they didn't pay my bills. It wasn't a thing about money. It was about love and passion and kind of fighting for the rights as a manager. So for me, the scene was always very loyal. Look, what is it? H2O you look out for your friends like family. That's it. That's kind of, it's a little different. I have to be business minded. I have to look at things. Is this, a good use of our time? Is this artist a time suck and also a money suck? Like, I do have to evaluate that. But for the most part, I still have that like loyalty headspace. And that's just something I don't think I'll ever shake.